to the culture. Just like my dear godmother, Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj, he was expert in presenting Krishna consciousness in Africa. You know, he would have like a lion head staff. Remember that? And he would wear it dressed like an African king. Even they made him an African king. So, and many of the more conservative elements in this country didn't understand that, what he was doing, and they criticized him for that. But he was super successful. So in other words, when he was preaching in Africa, he actually wore these just like African, whatever it is, you know, robes and jackets and everything like that. And he was very successful. He was meeting with prime ministers and kings and everything like that. So we have to be able to distinguish the essential from the non-essential aspects of Krishna consciousness. In other words, we don't want to just impose something that's not essential in the name of Krishna consciousness and then lose people. So anyway, don't want to be too liberal here.
So no pizza.
What?
You should reject pizza.
Reject pizza? Why should you reject pizza?
It's a cultural imposition.
Not a cultural imposition. In India, they like pizza more than anything else. If you go to India, and you ask them, you know, what's your favorite dish? In most places, they'll say pizza. So, the only reason I would reject pizza is because it's not good for your health, but that's another issue. No, but we should, even, I mean, I want to give a class before the class, but like, even in many temples that Prabhupada would go to, they would dress the deities in the local style. I remember in Mexico City, they dressed the deities. You ever been to Mexico City? They dressed the deities, they look Mexican, basically.
Even the deities themselves somehow look.
Yeah, but Prabhupada, he was there, he never commented in a negative way. And even when he went to Paris, he named the deities Radha Paris Ishvara. And he said something really funny. He said that Radharani is the most beautiful girl in Paris or something like that, and then Krishna's come to find the most beautiful girl in Paris. I mean, Prabhupada was very much culturally neutral in his presentation of Krishna consciousness. He didn't really try to impose something that would drive people away from Krishna. He tried to adjust the Krishna conscious presentation. Like Prabhupada said, you know, old wine and new bottles, the same thing, but just packaging it differently. I mean, even in San Francisco, they went to this mantra rock dance, and Prabhupada said, you know, stay high forever. You know, and that stay high, the hippies usually use that in reference to some drugs that they were taking. So Prabhupada was very expert in adapting things and being tolerant. So, okay, let's go on to Bhagavatam class. Rama Jaya Kunja Vihari Jaya thought because text 24 didn't have a purport, it wasn't as significant, but actually we should read both texts. Anyway, so because you have text 25 written up there, I believe, yeah, we're going to do that one responsively, and then we'll go back to text 24. Srimad Bhagavatam, 4th Canto, Chapter 16, texts 24 and 25. Om De Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Eshasva Padmo Pavane Eshasva Satmo Pavane Samecha Sanat Kumaram Bhagavantam Ekam Araja Bhakjala Vatamalam Tash Yanam Yato Brahma Param Vedanti The river Saraswati. This king will perform 100 sacrifices known as Ashwamedha. In the course of the last sacrifice, the heavenly king Indra will steal the sacrificial horse. You can repeat. At the source, no. So translation, this king Prithu will meet Sanat Kumara, one of the 4 Kumaras in the garden of his palace compound. The king will worship him with devotion and will be fortunate to receive instructions by which one can enjoy transcendental bliss. You can repeat, this king Prithu will meet Sanat Kumara, one of the 4 Kumaras in the garden of his palace compound. The king will worship him with devotion and will be fortunate to receive instructions by which one can enjoy transcendental bliss. So, purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada ki. See. The word Vedanti refers to one who knows something or enjoys something. When a person is properly instructed by a spiritual master and understands transcendental bliss, he enjoys life. As stated in Bhagavad Gita, 18th chapter, text 54, Brahmabhuta prasanatmana shochati nakangshati. When one attains to the Brahman platform, he neither hankers nor laments. He actually partakes of transcendental blissful enjoyment. Although King Prithu was an incarnation of Vishnu, he nonetheless taught the people in his kingdom to take instructions from the spiritual master who represents the disciplic succession. Thus one can become fortunate and enjoy a blissful life even within this material world. In this verse, the verb vidwanti is sometimes taken to mean understanding. Thus when a person understands Brahman, or the supreme source of everything, he enjoys a blissful life. Nice purport. So, Om Gana Timnanda Shah Gananjana Shlakaya Chakshu Unminitam Ena Tasmai Shi Namaha. So these 2 verses are actually really connected. Because in the beginning it's described how the king, that is Prithu Maharaj, was going to perform all these different sacrifices, 100 sacrifices, Shata Yajna, as described here. And these are Ashvamedha sacrifices, because Ashvamedha means where the horse is offered in sacrifice. There's the Gomeda, Ashvamedha sacrifice. And Gomeda, of course, means cow sacrifice. And in these sacrifices, the animal was actually rejuvenated. It was a test of the mantras. It wasn't simply that they were killing the cow or killing the horse and eating the meat. And these sacrifices established the king's supremacy over other kings. Especially what's called the Rajasuya sacrifice. That's only performed by emperors. Maharaj Yudhisthira performed this Rajasuya sacrifice, and of course the Kurus were very envious of him for But so one becomes more and more opulent or pious by performing these different sacrifices. And in this material world, it's actually, in one sense, punya karma, like material piety. It's not really transcendental. Most of the Vedic literatures are dealing with the three modes of nature, as Krishna says in the Gita. Trigunya, Vishaya Veda, these Trigunya Bhavarjana. And then he says, Nirdwan Go Vidushapasho, Niryoga Shema Atmavan. He says to Arjuna, because Arjuna was quoting from the Vedas to make an excuse why you should not fight in the battle for Kshetra. So he says to Arjuna, the Vedas are actually mainly meant for people who are in the modes of nature. Triguna, the three gunas, goodness, passion, and ignorance. So you were meant to rise above these things and be transcendental. So Pritha Maharaj, being an incarnation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, was actually meant to rise above all these performances. But he had an aspiration. And his aspiration was to perform 100 of these sacrifices. But there's a problem when you want to perform 100 Ashwamedha sacrifices. The problem is, like when you're doing anything in this world, people get envious. And actually, the more people who have criticized you in this world, the more you know you have a prominent position. Just like I was mentioning the other day, to the devotees, there's this magazine that criticizes ISKCON leaders. It's called Back to Prabhupada. And I was looking through it and I said, why don't they have any quotes from me in here? I want to be criticized more because I was feeling bereft of position, not being criticized in this magazine. So I'll write them a letter asking them to criticize me. So anyway, the more you do, the more you get criticized. And usually you can just let it roll off of you. I don't know if you understand that expression. In other words, just like water can roll off of something like a waxy covering on a lotus leaf. Usually you just, what? A duck back, yeah. So who knows? So you have ducks here in Finland, of course. And so the water just, because they have sort of a covering on the feathers of the duck, so it just will roll. So in India we actually say a lotus leaf. Kamala Dala Jala Jivana Talamo. Usually just, who cares? They put on the internet, you're a demon, you're a rascal, But if you do something like perform 100 Ashwamedha sacrifices, you got real trouble. Why do you have real trouble? Because you got trouble with Indra. And Indra just doesn't write on the internet things about you to criticize you. He comes down and he tries to make you either fall down from your position or he interferes with the performance of the 100 sacrifices. Because in order to go to the heavenly planets, it's sort of a prerequisite. That's how you get there. You perform 100 Ashwamedha sacrifices. So Indra thinks that if anyone's performing 100 Ashwamedha sacrifices, they're doing it for the purpose of going to the heavenly planets, and Indra's getting worried. Or if anyone's executing practically any sort of austerity, like if you're a brahmachari, for example, and you're really determined to remain a brahmachari, don't have too many of them here. One, two. Anyway, so it's a rare species, endangered species. When you put on the endangered species list, do not hunt. So anyway, Kali is getting rare and rare. So if one's a brahmachari and performing really heavy austerities, Indra also gets worried that, you want to take over his position, because there's this principle of atmavat manyate jagat, that you sort of perceive other people as having a similar motive as yourself. Isn't it? I mean, you see other people, you look at them, you say, they're thinking the way I am. But actually they're not. And sometimes you can commit real offenses against Vaishnavas by thinking like that. You just look at an advanced Vaishnava and you think, well, he's hungry like me. The reason he's yelling to his servant that when he didn't get his chapatis, and he's hungry. No, but actually his motive is to train up his servant, not so much that he's under the control of hunger. So that's called atmavat manyate jagat. You see the whole world is like yourself, right? So Indra is seized like that. So when someone's performing 100 horse sacrifices or someone's executing austerities, he gets worried and he tries to interfere with those particular performances. For example, with austerities, like if someone wants to be a brahmachari, he sends down Cupid and agents of Cupid, Cupidettes, as they say. And there's many examples of that. Of course, Vishwamitra Muni is one example. Vishwamitra Muni, he wanted to become a Brahma Rishi, and he was executing all these austerities to do that. And of course, he had a lot of problems in the path. Not only Indra interfered with him, but other things happened. But one time he was meditating for like 1,000 years, and Indra got really worried, and Indra sent this Apsara, Urvasi, to try to attract him. And immediately when he heard her ankle bells, he forgot about his austerities. And as a result, this very nice little girl, Shakuntala, was born. You know that story? And Shakuntala, of course, was married to Dushmanta, and they had Bharat as a son. Anyway, that's another story. And then another time, he was meditating, and Indra sent Ramba. Ramba was another heavenly Apsara. And instead of succumbing to Ramba's allurement, he just got angry with her. And she became disincarnate. In other words, like without a body. He burned her up. So in this way, Indra was interfering with his performance of austerities. And he was successful. And sometimes Indra didn't even have to do that to interfere with Vishwamitra's austerities. I mean, one time, even a bird stopped his austerities. Vishwamitra Muni was meditating under a tree, and as he was meditating, you know, birds don't have much control of their bodily functions. The bird passed stool on his head. I've had that happen to me too. I mean, isn't it, you know, under a tree? I mean, if you're in Vrindavan and go under a tree, the monkeys will pass urine on your head. Has anyone had that happen to them in Vrindavan? Yeah. Don't go under a tree where monkeys are, because you end up with the remnants of the monkeys. So he got angry with the bird. The bird burnt the bird to ashes. So he lost his tejas at that point. I mean, ultimately he achieved success and became a great devotee, and even became friends with Vasishtha Muni, who was previously his enemy. But Indra does this all the time. And in other cases where he did it, even with Markandeya Rishi he did it, but he was unsuccessful. He sent down Cupid. Cupid is actually a real person. Did you know that? It's not something that's just invented for Valentine's Day in the Western world. Even in India they have Valentine's Day, don't they? Yes. So it's traditional. Yeah, it comes from India. So we should celebrate Valentine's Day because it's Indian. So anyway, it's part of Indian culture. So we have a special festival, Sunday feast, and everything in honor of Valentine's Day. So Cupid is a real person, Kandarpa. And he has a bow and arrows, and his arrows are the objects of the senses, you know, form, taste, smell, things like that. And he works for Indra. And so he comes down, and with Markandeya Rishi, he was actually firing his arrows at Markandeya, and Markandeya Rishi didn't pay attention to it. And a similar thing happened when Indra tried to interfere with the austerities of Narayan Rishi. Narayan Rishi, of course, they are twin incarnations of Krishna and actually Arjuna. It's interesting. And so they were meditating in Bhagarika Ashram, and Indra sent down Cupid, and he sent down Cupid. Another point about Cupid is he's ananga. In other words, he's invisible. Because previously he was visible. That was pretty good. You could tell when he was coming. But when he got burnt to ashes by Lord Shiva, he became invisible. And that is dangerous. You never know when he's coming. I mean, it would be easy, like if you looked out, looked at the doorway, and there was Cupid. Okay, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram. And then he can't affect you. But if you can't see him, he's sitting right here and he just like fires an arrow. Then it's dangerous. So anyway, he's a Nanga. So he came and was sent down along with Spring and so many other and the Apsaras to try to attack Narayana Rishi. And Narayana Rishis, they simply yawned. They were not affected at all. And Narayan, he said to Indra, because Indra was embarrassed by the whole thing, he said, if you're really interested in girls, I'll give you a good one. And he produced Urvasi with his own potency. And he said, you can take it back with you. And that's how Urvasi appeared in this world. The most famous of all the Apsaras in the heavenly planets. So, anyway, so Indra's continually trying to interfere. And in the case of Maharaj Prithu, when Maharaj Prithu got to the 100th horse sacrifice, what did Indra do? He kept stealing the horses. And he stole the horses in a very interesting way. Not only did he steal them, but to avoid getting attacked by Prithu's son, because Prithu had a son, I think it was Vijayatashva or something like that was his name. And Prithu's son was sent after Indra to retrieve the horses, but Indra put on the guise of various sannyasis, bogus sannyasis. Sometimes he dressed as a naked sannyasi smeared with ash. And you see this in India too. You see with Nagababas. And then sometimes he dressed like with a sannyasi with a big top knot on his head, with hair like that. And so he invented so many varieties of sannyasis just to avoid getting attacked by Prithu's son. And eventually what happened is that Indra was stopped. But then Prithu Maharaj was actually stopped from having 100 sacrifices. Not by Indra, but by Lord Brahma. Lord Brahma said to him, you should be satisfied because you performed 99. Why do you have to perform 100 sacrifices? Because if you keep trying to perform the 100 sacrifices, Indra will do so many more irreligious things to prevent you from performing this sacrifice. So just be happy like that. So how does this relate to the second verse, where King Prithu meets Sanat Kumar? Because when one achieves spiritual realization, one is no longer interested in the profit, adoration, distinction of this material world. In other words, whether it's performing 100 horse sacrifices or becoming a prominent personality or a politician. Just like yesterday, I was talking to Sri Govinda about politicians in India, right? Right, politicians. And how there's so much corruption. We're not going to mention any names about the politicians in India. So one loses all interest in this material world, just like the description given by Srila Rupa Goswami is one desires to enjoy society, friendship, and love. You shouldn't see Krishna playing his flute on the banks of the Keshi Ghat. In other words, raso varjam, raso pyasha, param jashantavartate, that one gets a higher taste or a higher pleasure when one gets spiritual realization. One loses his interest in the material world and becomes nirapeksha. What does nirapeksha mean? Neutral, disinterested, not negative. Sometimes we find people, like especially the Mayavadis, who are negative about things in this material world. And sometimes immature devotees are very, very negative. Just like in the beginning days of the movement, there was in New York, in our temple of New York, some of the brahmacharis were very negative and wouldn't let the ladies in the temple room chant japa. So you know the story? I hope they don't do that here. I hope I'm not saying anything. Anyway, I don't want to do any politically incorrect things. So anyway, they wouldn't let the ladies in the temple room. And so they were very scared, And then when Prabhupada heard this, he got very upset. Because they're just negative. Because when you're negative about something, you're thinking more about it. Like Kamsa was more Krishna conscious than I will ever be. You know, I wish I could think of Krishna 24 hours a day, like Kamsa, Ravana, Shishupal, you know. You know, they were strict, of course, not in a favorable way, but they were thinking of Krishna in the spirit of animosity much more than most devotees I know, right? So when you're negative about it, like Prabhupada said, attraction and repulsion. Now, Krishna said attraction and repulsion are felt by conditioned souls. So they're opposite sides of the same coin, Prabhupada said. Like you have a coin, you know, heads, tails. Sometimes we would flip a coin and we'd say, heads I win, tails you lose. You understand? That's cheating, you know. In other words, you win on both sides. So it's like that when you have some repulsion towards things in this world. Then you're thinking of them even more deeply. You know, when you hate someone, you think of them. We often teach people about this, like we have a course about forgiveness. Like sometimes someone does something that really hurts you, or you're hurt by that particular activity, and then you're just thinking of the person, you know, getting even with them 24 hours a day. Well, you're just like living with that person by thinking of them that way. And they're hurting you, and they're not hurting you even more, but you're hurting yourself at that point. So, the whole point is to become neutral. Of course, in the discussion of rasa, that's called shanta rasa, you know, peaceful rasa, neutral rasa. But this neutrality is important. It's the foundation of building up so we can go to the higher platforms of devotional service. In other words, you can't immediately go to Sakya Ras or Dasya Ras, what to speak of Madhurya Ras, if you're not neutral. All the rasas are like the material elements in the sense that when you have the different qualities of the material elements, like earth, water, fire, air, ether, each quality has a specific, let's say, sense object. Like that. There's the smell. Does everyone know where the smell comes from? The smell of earth. And the taste is a taste in liquid. You understand? Of water, liquid. So, and the sound of ether. So each of these elements, as you go to the grosser elements, you have all the different qualities present. Like in earth, you have sound, you have taste, you have smell, all these things when you go to the grosser elements. So the same thing with the rasas in the spiritual world. When you go to the higher rasas, you have servitude and all the different, and of course neutrality towards the material world. You have, anyway, you get the qualities of the lower rasas as you go to the higher rasas. It's not that the gopis are thinking of enjoying themselves. They're thinking of serving Krishna through their loving exchanges. When the gopis hear Krishna's flute, they're not thinking, wow, great, we get to enjoy ourselves. They're thinking, great, we get to give Krishna enjoyment. Because they have fully realized their position as Prakriti in relationship to the Purusha. Krishna is the supreme male, and all of us, of course, are Prakriti in relationship to him. So, the point is we have to come to this platform of neutrality in dealing with the material world. Not attracted and not repulsed. Like if someone says something about the material world, you don't go, ew, horrible. Like if someone says, would you like to go to the movies to see the latest film about the Avengers or something like that? He knows about things like that. Because the Grasses have to study things like that. To learn about the material world. So anyway, so if you want, instead of saying, yuck, you say, I'm not interested, I'm having so much fun serving Krishna. If someone offers you something, that has nothing to do with Krishna, and you can't engage in Krishna's service, then you're not interested. I'm not interested. Neutral. Or, let's say for the women, if a handsome Rambo comes by, Rambo, or the Terminator or something like that, comes by, and he shows his muscles. I'm not interested. It's boring. So that's big. Or for the men, if some beautiful girl is boring, you're boring. So for a devotee, the whole material world is boring. He's not negative about it. And even things in the mode of goodness are boring. Like people spend so much money going to visit different natural phenomena in this world. Like they spend so much money. I mean, I have one disciple who spent so much money to see the icebergs in Alaska. You know what icebergs are? And I said, why don't you just take a glass of water and put some ice in it? It's the same thing. What's the difference between seeing a big ice cube and a small ice cube? Isn't it? Is there any difference? No. It's a lot cheaper. I mean, tens of thousands of dollars are going to some boat to see some ice cubes in the water. That's how the devotee sees things, It's all useless. Or I have some relative who went on safari. He spent $50,000 to go to Africa on safari, where they go in these jeeps and everything like that. They see the tigers and the lions in Africa. What's the use? What's the use? You just go to the zoo. I mean, you could spend. I was in the zoo once. This had nothing to do with the topic of class, but anyway, it's interesting. And they had the house with the most dangerous animals on earth. And the tiger, the lion, the snakes. And you get to the last cage and it says, "This is the most dangerous animal," and it was just a mirror. You human beings. So anyway, so the devotee just loses interest because it's so much fun serving Krishna. That's the point. It's fun dancing before the deities. It's fun. I mean, why would one want to go to a disco or a karaoke club at night? Unless you could chant Hare Krishna in a karaoke club. I mean, it's boring. So that's neutrality. And that comes from having a higher taste of Krishna consciousness. That comes from having, here we go to this verse, having the association with a devotee like Sanat Kumar. Because bhakti comes from devotees. It doesn't come from Krishna. It's described by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur that bhakti is independent. And bhakti resides in the hearts of the devotees. Krishna se Tumar, Krishna te par. Which means Krishna is yours. You have the power to give him this Ohe Vaishnava Thakur. So, if we properly associate and serve devotees, then we get this higher taste, and then Brahma Bhuta Prasanamanda Shochati Nikanchati. We're not hankering or lamenting for anything in this world, because we're happy. Because as long as you're hankering and lamenting, at Bhukti Mukti Siddhi Kama Sakalaya Shanta, you're not peaceful. And if you're not peaceful, you're not happy. So the whole point is to come to Shanti, or peacefulness, by enjoying Krishna consciousness. Of course, that's not the goal. The goal is actually to love Krishna. And then when you love Krishna, you're not so much interested in being peaceful anymore. You're interested in pleasing Krishna. But that's another issue. But at least to be neutral towards the things in this material world, to be convinced that there's no enjoyment in this material world. We've tried everything. As that nice song goes, can't get no satisfaction. Remember that? Oh, we used to sing it. We had a band many years ago here in Finland. And we would sing Can't Get No Satisfaction with the devotees. Some of the devotees are here. Jacko and Venugopal. And at the end, we'd end up chanting Hare Krishna. He said, can't get no satisfaction in this material world. But I tried, and I tried. So don't try.